Listen, I think that idea of legacy itself and leaving the jersey in a better place is a really beautiful one. I think it's beautiful in a lot of ways because I don't think it's just about the All Blacks. I think that it's fundamental to human experience. I think it's, as a parent, that it's not about me, it's about service to something bigger than myself, whether that's children or, we talked before we recorded around purpose. I think there's something that is very, very small yet spiritually powerful about that.
Do you want to dive into the minds of those who dare? With an insatiable appetite for knowledge and a disdain for mediocrity, Curious Leadership, with me, Dominic Monkhouse, is your fortnightly look into the mindsets of some of the world's most trailblazing leaders. From seasoned strategists and investors to pioneering entrepreneurs and experts, I'll explore their personal journeys, their unorthodox decisions, and the lessons they've learned while shaping the future. Today, I'm talking with and learning from James Kerr. James is the author of the fantastic book Legacy. Now, many leaders that I work with think that purpose and culture and values sound a bit soft. But the book and the conversation I'm having with James today digs into what it took for the New Zealand All Blacks to double down on those things and take their win rate from what is a very respectable 75% to a world-class, the most winningest sports team in the world, 86%. So a fantastic conversation on all things purpose, culture, and performance with James Kerr. I loved it. I'm sure you will too.
Hi, my name is James Kerr. I'm the author of Legacy, which goes inside the New Zealand All Blacks to look at their culture, leadership, and mindset towards sustainable success. I'm a performance coach. I work with elite teams around the world, and I'm a speaker. I like to get up and say a few words sometimes.
Why the All Blacks?
Well, I'm a boy from Aotearoa, New Zealand, the land of the long white cloud, and the All Blacks are our guys. They're kind of proof positive. I live in the UK now, but I kind of still call New Zealand home. The All Blacks are kind of proof positive that a small, committed group of people can take on the rest of the world and win and keep on winning. They are the most successful team over the last 125 years in terms of sustained success. So it was both a kind of, a labor of love, but also, what are the transferable principles within one group that we can take into our group? So it was a great opportunity, really, just to focus on what it takes to kind of become and stay the best.
Did they give you unfettered access? I mean, did you write this from the inside or did you write this sort of from the outside?
Legacy was actually the second book. I did a book with them called Manna. Manna means the sort of the spirit inside, respects, authority, and so on in the Maori language. And I had the access originally through that book, but then, of course, I formed relationships. And I saw the connection between the work that I was doing outside, in the unreal world, in the real world, and what they had been doing, clearly, and really that cross-domain thinking. How do you create engagement? How do you create meaning? Why does purpose matter? Why does culture matter? And I just, it really crystallized in my mind as a fantastic way of engaging with many of the questions that business leaders face and leaders in all kinds of organizations, and even those kind of leading their life, I guess, face a bit through the prism of a sexy outfit, if you like, an outfit that people know about, people wonder about, but also that does the business when it counts. And so I just thought there's a book in there somewhere.
You said you're a performance coach. Who's your audience? Who's your customer?
Sport, military, and business. So I've worked in the Premier League. I've worked with Tier 1 Special Force outfits. I'm a C-suite level. With the CEO and his or her team. Really, again, the principles really are the same. across all great groups. And many of the challenges are the same. The context is obviously very different.
Yeah.
But you have, you have issues around silos. You have issues, interpersonal issues. You have the need to connect around kind of common values and common cause. You have, a perennial problem that the core team is committed and holds themselves to high standards, but all the tributaries in may not. How do you extend that? You have issues around change, around defeat, around your resilience, personal resilience over time. How do you maintain performance at a high level consistently? How do you get that balance right? So many of the challenges and the opportunities are very much the same, whatever domain you happen to operate in. And so I try to apply those principles across different spaces.
And have you read Captain Class?
I have, yeah.
And I mean, I thought that was interesting because I think the All Blacks were the only team in that book where they were in twice, weren't they? Yeah, because the premise of the book is some teams win, but some teams create a sort of dynasty.
Yeah,
and the All Blacks have done it twice.
I deeply respect the book. I do challenge some aspects of it because it is very personality focused. It is the captain's class, and I think that we are products of our environment, and there is a synergy between the character of the captain, if you like, or the captains, the leader, and the culture and the expectations of that culture. Yeah. I think the thing that I would say, the reason the All Blacks turn up twice, and I would argue they could turn up more than twice, is that there is something within the ethos of that group that's made them the world's best for 125 years. They've been ranked world number one for twice as long as the rest of the world combined. Right? Twice as long as the rest. Their win ratio is just a notch under 80% of all encounters. They've only lost at home. I'm not sure the count now, about 42 times in 125 years. Scotland's never beaten them, and Wales, one of the great rugby nations, last beat them back in 1953.
Do you know what? One of the stories from your book, which I tell all the time, because often we're talking about rituals with clients, and jump on the seats of the bus and shout, "We never lose in Wales," as they go over the Severn Road Bridge. And it's like, these are grown men, but I just love the playfulness of having that as a ritual that then,
but also reminds them of the standards that they're held to, the expectations that they had. And that I would argue is, yes, it's championed by the captain of the day, right? But it's also expected by a nation, and it's expected within that group. Their expectations are higher, in fact, than outside the group. Now, that's not just about the personalities, the people in the jersey. It's what the jersey means. And there is something in that tradition, I think, that has been handed on and handed down, and it's changed over time. That means that if you step into that space, if you become a steward of that jersey, you become the keeper of the flame, if you like. And that's a tremendously powerful cultural belief system, I think. And so, if we talk about captain's class, yes, there's a sort of a small sticky core of extraordinary a leader or leaders who are able to generate that around themselves, but also that is generated around them. And it's something that you see in a special force outfit. For instance, there have been great sacrifices made in order for the current generation to be who they are now. And you represent that past. You represent that history. You are a steward of that history. You leave the cap badge in a better place. That idea, that ethos, if you like, I think gives power to that captaincy rather than the captaincy give power to that. And so that would be my only quibble with that interpretation. And I think ultimately the ethos outlasts the individual in a great group. And if you can get an ethos right, it doesn't it does matter clearly who plays, and people need to step up. But it's that ethos, that characteristic spirit, the character of the group.
I read Clive Woodward's book, Winning, about the difference from him in 99 and 2003. And he sort of said, look, I'm not going to pick people who are negative under pressure, right? And you think, well, that would be that. Maybe that's a type of thing that then transcends manager to manager, but it doesn't in England, right? The manager turns up and it's like, well, whatever he said is all bollocks. And the All Blacks have this, as you say, you have this tradition, that cultural tradition that transcends, individual teams. There's a consistency that constantly seems to raise their game. But I'd love to get you to tell the story of that transition from the amateur era to the professional era. You sum it up well. There's a strategic offsite, I think, where people decide, that they're gonna do something differently because things aren't working.
The All Blacks have been an exceptional group for 100 years or thereabouts before professionalism came along. So they were almost professional before
professionalism was a thing, yeah.
Except in certain areas. And one of them was around alcohol. And part of the tradition, the heritage, I guess, of the group was a sort of sink or swim court sessions after a game where they'd, you dropped a ball, you drink, you scored a try, you drink. But the world had changed. And it came to a head 2004, 2003, I'm not sure exactly, in Sun City in South Africa. See, I'm not even sure my dates are right here, but I need to come back. In Sun City in South Africa, and the drinking got out of control. It was a big thing. And the Springboks, they'd lost to the Springboks, and they'd come last in the Tri-Nations. So it wasn't working on the field, it wasn't working off the field. And there's an argument to say that, some of the players have got a bit big for their rugby boots. Professionalism had made them economically more viable, more commercially, given them more fame, individualized them a little bit. And Wayne Smith, the great Wayne Smith, who was the then assistant coach, or said, we either fix this or I'm out of here, pretty much. He said this is not going to cut it anymore. And that really was the catalyst for a series of conversations around culture, but ultimately around culture and standard, who we are and what we stand for. And that manifested in many different ways. Clive, when you mentioned Clive Woodward, when he came with the England setup, one of the metaphors that he uses, it's like you inherit a country house that hasn't been renovated since 1953, So you wait for a sunny weekend and you put everything out. You take all the furniture out and you put it on the lawn. And then you only choose the stuff you want to put back in. All the rest can go off to the dump. And then you get a chance to kind of refresh. You take the best stuff and all of the drinking habits. Let's get rid of them, but let's keep this idea of legacy. And you put it back in and you start to really define who you are, where you're going, why it matters. Those the kind of the three pillars, I think, of a great culture, kind of values, vision, and purpose. And they really began that conversation, and it was a very deliberate resetting. And around that time, a phrase appeared. Brian Lahore, a former captain who was the manager of the team, or at the time, which is better people make better All Blacks. So it was a focus on character and develop holistic development. You can be a great player, but we really want you to be a great human being.
Yeah,
a great leader, really. So there's a phrase I use. One captain but 15 leaders. How do we all step up? How are we all making that difference all the time, every time? Now, collectively, that's usually impactful and hugely powerful. Bill Walsh, the former coach of the San Francisco 49ers, said, championship teams are the result of kind of cumulative character. It's the decisions, the hundreds of decisions we all make every day cumulatively by sort of marginal gain will lead to breakthrough results. The San Antonio Spurs call it pounding the rock. Take a piece of rock, take a piece of marble, chip away 50 blows, 75 blows, 100 blows. Nothing will happen. 101st blow, maybe you get your breakthrough result. But it took the 99 blows that came before, or the 100 blows that came before to get there. And that's the accumulation of characterful decisions. Wayne Smith calls it kind of, I think he calls it leaderful teams. Teams that are full of leaders making decisions. They know what they stand for. They know what they want. They know where they're going. They know why it matters. They seek to create the conditions that their teammates flourish. San Antonio Spurs again say, how can I make my teammates better? So with that sort of better people make better All Blacks, it became a focus rather on results than on culture and character, or a culture of character, probably, I would say.
Yeah.
That's, proved very powerful. It becomes a collective. It becomes a brotherhood, a fellowship. It means everyone's holding each other to account. It means I've got my hand up. I'm taking ownership.
Seeking criticism,
seeking, another phrase, stab me in the belly, not the back. Tell me what I need to get better.
Yeah.
So very much about creating, reconfiguring and rebooting that kind of cultural essence, I think, really happened around that time. They kind of cleared out the sheds, came back with the basics, and began a kind of a different, I believe that culture is a conversation. It's a common understanding. And they began a different kind of conversation about what it meant to be an All Black, what it meant to be a human being.
The cultural, the values that you write about in the book, had they already been written down at that point? Or is this the point where they start to be written down? And are they written down, or are you identifying a behavior and you're giving it a label? And actually, if we looked inside the All Blacks,
this was my take.
Yeah.
On what I saw. And again, as I say, I was trying to understand what they were doing through the prism of the sort of work I was doing.
Yeah.
Outside that environment. So I really identified what I saw as the key parts. There's been a little bit of writing it down. In fact, Sean Fitzpatrick, who was a former captain, and John Kerwin, one of the former greats, they both played in the first Rugby World Cup and won it. When they came time to leave the team, they were concerned that the values and the standards were being kind of abandoned, and they put together a book called The Black Book, which was their sort of first attempt to do it. So it's an iterative process. So I would say if you step back and just as a case study, the culture is an organic thing.
Yeah.
It's kind of generated in its creation, I hate the phrase, but ongoingly,
Yeah.
And so, the culture there now will be different or have evolved from when I was around. And, you can see it, for instance, in the haka, the challenge. Once upon a time, the haka was a black and white minstrel show travesty.
When you go back to that sort of amateur professional era that that you talk about, like half the people don't know the words, nobody seems to care,
and they're out of rhythm. It's a parody, really. And Buck Shelford, first Maori captain, reinvigorated and rebooted the haka, and they kind of honoured it and did it right. Just go on. There's a sort of a timeline here that reinvigorated and did it right. And then the era that I studied and observed, they really took it to that next level. They went, okay, well, there's kamate, the traditional haka, but that had become kind of wallpaper for the place. It lost its meaning. So they co-created a new haka. And then over time, they changed the formation of that haka into a spearhead, into a V shape. And if you saw the test against Italy, TJ Perenara led it his last time in an All Black jersey, his last time leading a test. he made mention of the Treaty of Waitangi, which is a very political football that's happening in New Zealand at the moment around the relationship of Maori to the state based on the original treaty. So it politicized it a little bit. So it has evolved, and it has evolved because in that way it retains and maintains and generates meaning for that group. And I think it's the meaning that comes out of it that's so powerful.
Again, historically, there weren't that many Maori players, and now it feels more that sort of Maori and South Sea Islanders who've got residency dominate the team.
A couple of things there. You say residency, I do think we have to be really careful there because New Zealand is a South Pacific nation.
Yep.
It is in terms of Samoa, Tonga, and so on. In some areas, larger populations than in the islands, and third, fourth generation. So this mythology that tends to happen over here that New Zealand recruits in these players is very much part of the nation. I mean, I think you're right. There is more representation. That maybe says more about latent, racist attitudes, perhaps, in days past in terms of who gets selected.
It feels like, in the same way that rugby has had from the outside, has had an impact on South Africa. Again, there's a sort of that transition. I just felt as though maybe there's a change in the relationship. Like in the UK, you don't have any Indian or Pakistani guys, very few playing rugby, but much more representation in the cricket team. And so some sports, rugby being the national sport, looks like it's had some sort of...
It definitely has. I think the demographic has changed a bit. And, and I think, we talked earlier about that sort of change over time. The old school command and control, public school, private school approach to leadership, didn't cut it anymore. You've got a very different set of cultural assumptions that come in with a Pacifica around respect and dignity and a good thing too. And so that the nature of leadership and the nature of kind of collective ownership and the collective, I think, changed essentially within that group. In the old days, it was my way or the highway. Now it's, okay, lad, how are we going to do that? Wayne Smith again, who deserves huge credit for a lot of these changes. He's an exceptional thinker. He told me that he tries to go through his week now not telling anyone anything. He just wants to ask questions. Now, if you think about, English coaching, I'm not entirely sure that model is caught up yet.
Well, do you know what? There's a great, I don't know if it's still online, but there's a great RNLI video. Oh no, it's the Sailing Federation, and it's how to make a cup of tea by only asking questions as an example of great coaching. And if you, in some senses, it's just absolutely ludicrous to say I'm going to teach people to make a cup of tea by asking them questions. But it's that, if you don't set it up like that, you don't realize what's possible, because it's just much easier to tell people what to do.
Well, it's much easier and less effective.
Yeah.
Because, if you tell someone to do something, usually it's in one ear or the other. They're not listening, right, to begin with. Or they resent the fact that you're telling them what to do. Or they think, actually, that's not how my grandmother taught me how to make it. Who the hell are you anyway? You're wrong. Whatever it is, whatever the response is, reaction is. But if you say, hey, do you feel like a nice warm beverage? Yes. They have to search inside themselves. They have to go inside. So they internalize it. And then you go, do you know what a tea bag is? I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know what a tea bag is. And once you've gone through that process, you've had to sort of rummage around inside yourself a little bit, and then articulate the answer to yourself, then articulate the answer out in public. And by the time we've been through that process, we'll the line I use, we'll stay up late and order pizza. We feel a sense of ownership. And it's kind of empowerment 101 in a way. There's a military phrase that that, empowerment is people executing a plan they've had a part in planning.
Yes.
And if you ask questions they've had a part in planning, it's not an opinion, it's not your opinion, it's their opinion. And so that reversal, if you like, that flip, is engagement 101. It's about creating a coalition of the willing through smart questions. And we know in organizational change around, appreciative inquiry. For those of listening who don't know, I'd give it a Google, which has, I think, 5 principles. One, and probably the most important one, is that the questions we ask are fateful. The questions that because we ask those questions, it means we're putting our attention on that aspect. Now, if we come with, this is how we're going to do it, you're not really getting beneath the skin of it. If you go, how should we do it? What's going on here? You get to some sort of first principles understanding together of what's going on. And you mentioned your daughter, you have a 10-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
Much better to ask her what it might be like to have a clean bedroom than tell her to clean up a bedroom. If you tell her to clean up a bedroom, it's like, no way. If you say, wouldn't you like the best bedroom in the world? She's more likely to go, yeah.
Well, do you know what? I was sharing with her last night that I had realized that the best way to get her to do what I wanted to do is to tell her she doesn't have to do it. I said, you need to wash your hair. And she's like, no, I don't. I'm playing hockey tomorrow. I don't need to wash my hair tonight. I said, okay, don't wash your hair then. I don't care. Go to school with greasy hair. And the next thing I know, she's in the bath. She's washed her hair.
There's a sort of an embedded question there is, you don't really want to go to school with greasy hair, do you?
Yeah.
Really?
I don't care. It's not my hair.
It's not. Clearly, I think it's probably the quip I should throw in at that. but that idea of empowerment, of leadership, of influence rather than power. I think, so we talked about, in a military context, there's a line in the military, if you have to give an order, you've lost already.
Yeah.
Right? If you're enforcing your rank, you're not leading. You're telling, and you'll get that kind of malicious compliance. You'll get the kind of, the going through the motions of things because people aren't engaged. It's not their choice. People want that sense of autonomy and choice and reliance on self, and that's my project. And I think one of the tricks of the trade, it's not even a trick. One of a technique is really you go, how do you make my idea other people's idea? And we talk about military again. The leadership doctrine, mission command in a military setting is, you get the right people on board. You train them right, make sure they've got the capability. You resource them right, make sure they've got the capacity. And then you communicate in a certain way. You communicate intention. That's called the commander's intent. This is the end game. Would like you to do X in order to achieve Y, right? And then you get out of the way. And then what that does is that means then the subordinate, if you like, that has ownership, and the how is up to them.
Yeah.
So they have the autonomy that's required. Now, asking questions is not too dissimilar to that if you think about it, leading with questions. You might go, listen, the intent, we all know that we want to achieve, I don't know, better quarterly results, whatever it is, right? In order to achieve better annual returns, in order that we get our bonuses, whatever the narrative is. In your area, what do you reckon? How? And then, you have people bring it. But as soon as you're going, therefore, I want you to knock on more doors or whatever it is, they're going,
nah, wrong thing. Yeah.
I don't fancy knocking on more doors. And anyway, it's not going to make a difference. They know, in humanist psychology, they say, the expertise is in the room. As a leader, isn't it our job to unlock that expertise, the potential that's in the room, and to use those resources? So, if by asking questions, you're a data point of many, not a data point of one.
Let me interrupt the conversation just for a minute because I don't want you to miss this. My new book, Mind Your Fucking Business, is out on Amazon. If you're thinking yet another business book, I think you're wrong. This is actually a blueprint to cutting through the noise and achieving unparalleled success for you. It's based on 10 years of business coaching, spotting similar problems that people have had and coming up with real world solutions. If it's supercharging sales, if it's mastering talent acquisition, building a powerhouse brand, cultivating a company culture that breeds success, then this book is a ticket to your transformative journey. It's filled with practical tools and frameworks that I use every single day with my clients as part of their coaching program. If you want to take your business from good to great, look, you can go to Amazon and you can buy it, or you can click the link in the show notes and head over to monkhouseandcompany.com. I'll send it to you today. I'll send you a copy for free. I want to help you build a fantastic business. Now, back to the conversation. Well, we were working with a client yesterday and, they were looking at the disparity between what they've billed and what they've invoiced. And there's too big a gap. So they were looking at the utilization of their team and it's 23%. Factories being utilized 23%. So too low. So their plan tomorrow is to say to their team, what do we think it should be? Like on a day-to-day basis, how many hours do you think you should be doing productive work? And the team are going to come up with a number like 5 or 6 or 7. They're not going to come up with 1 or 2 because they were saying, well, how do we tell them they have to work harder? I went, you don't have to tell them anything. You just have to ask them how hard you think they have to work. They will answer the question and it'll be their answer.
And respect goes a long way, because if you respect somebody, they're more likely to show self-respect around it. There's a lovely line from the beginning of one of the SF units, the Special Boat Service, where the founder, Roger Courtney, advertised for volunteers. And the line was, we're not looking for people with discipline. We're looking for people with self-discipline. And I think it's a lovely way to distinguish. Discipline is, I know what to do when I'm told what to do. Self-discipline is, I know what to do. I know what's required and I'm prepared to do it. Now, if you can begin, now you need the right people. But if you're able to say, okay, on a scale of productivity, what is it? Let's say you at least want to be a 7. But that comes from then you say, okay, how then can we create the conditions to enable that to happen? How can I support you in achieving that consistently? Well, listen, the lunch break is in the wrong time, or that you'll get ideas and you're learning. And so with a sort of beginner's mind, if you like as a leader, I know nothing. You know everything. The expertise is at the front line, at the point of information. And coming in as a resource for that group rather than as a kind of commander of that group is a much, much more powerful paradigm or kind of model to step into in order to unleash the potential of that group. There's a wonderful word in the Pacifica region called VA, V-A. It means the in-between, the space in between. And in that idea of a group, that we're not individuals in that group. We're that group is the sum total of the connections between us. And in the Maori language, one of the words for leader, for a chieftain, is rangatira, the weaver, together. So if you walk onto your factory floor, for instance, and you go, right, and your premise is, how can we raise productivity around here? Because I've seen the numbers. Rather than come in and go, it's really low, you've got to do better. Come on, guys, let's lift our game. And everyone goes, yeah, well, whatever. You come in and you sit in there and you go, hey, listen, how are we doing? And somebody will say, well, we're doing okay, but I spend most of my life waiting for deliveries.
Yeah.
Right? Suddenly you know the problem, you know the bottleneck, you know the constraint. The expertise is always at the front line. I mean, it's the premise of Kaizen and the Japanese, and lean and all of that is actually an empowerment methodology. In its originating form, it was the idea that the person right at the factory floor can pull the cable and stop it if there's a problem, or can point out problem. And what that does is it means, you've got 1,000 data points, right, out there, monitors, antennae out there looking for for how to improve. You're creating leadership at every level, and you're creating a level of engagement you can never, ever achieve if you just tell someone something.
You've created the psychological safety to allow people to stop the line, which just is the antithesis.
And Kozen, that was very difficult. They had to, because the Japanese hierarchical society just post-war, no one really wanted to put their head above the parapet. And so they would paint reds, they call it the red square. They would put a red square on the floor. And that was your zone of psychological safety. You could step into the red square and say whatever you wanted. So they ritualized it in order to have people kind of release the shackles of inhibition and fear to step into a place where it was okay, in fact, expected to say something. So there was a sort of a mindset shift in terms of both radical candor, as it's now called, psychological safety, and kind of ownership, at that front line.
Yeah, we do sort of pre-mortem work often with clients because, again, it creates that expectation of having to say something as opposed to somebody trying to work against the expectation. So like, here's the plan. Great plan, isn't it? Like, well, if 10 people say yes, then the 11th person probably just says yes. Whereas if you say, okay, everyone has to come up with 3 reasons why this plan's crap. Everyone has to come up. It's no longer a challenge.
They're kind of red teaming it or whatever it is. Exactly. And it's based on question.
Yeah.
What do you really think? If we wanted to what could go wrong?
Going back to legacy, do you have a favorite? Because as you say, you've teased out what you think the values are, and you've written them. Do you have a favorite?
Listen, I think that idea of legacy itself and leaving New Jersey in a better place is a really beautiful one. I think it's beautiful in a lot of ways because I don't think it's just about the All Blacks. I think that it's fundamental to human experience. I think it's, as a parent, that it's not about me. It's about service to something bigger than myself, whether that's children or, we talked before we recorded around purpose. I think there's something that is very, very small, less spiritually powerful about that. So I also like the Brad Thorne story, which is an older warrior. He was a dual international. He played rugby league for Australia, came over, played for the All Blacks, won a World Cup. He was 36. Came over to the UK, won the Heineken Cup, won in Europe. He was pulled from the front line of rugby as a player, aged 40-something. But his father had, told him he was a lazy kid. And they gave him a motto, which was champions do extra. And so Brad would always be the first in the gym. He'd be the last to leave. He was always doing that little bit extra because it's those incremental moments of contribution that make such a difference. And I think those two ideas in tandem actually work really powerfully. That idea of how am I going to leave the jersey, the entity in the place, the big picture. Well, the how then becomes the question. Yeah. And then those small incremental moments of effort, of attention, of taking pains, being painstaking, but taking pains to do something really, really well. The way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I think in those terms, because sometimes we can kind of get lost in I call it kind of the Miss World purpose, world peace. But the how is got to be more marginal gains. It's got to be more, if you do a podcast, do the best possible recording that you can. You make a cup of coffee, make it a great cup of coffee. That excellence reflex. And if you apply that to human relationships, I think it becomes hugely powerful because you go, every encounter with every human being then becomes an opportunity to make a difference, to make a contribution to them, to purpose, and so on. One of my favorite quotes I use in the book is from Pericles, the Athenian statesman. And he just says, our achievements aren't written on stone monuments. They're woven into the lives of others. And that sense of making a kind of champions do extra, that meaningful contribution that you can make to other people, tap, 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 pounding the rock, I think is a very powerful way to live. I've tried to do it as much as possible. I don't always get it right, obviously. But But when you kind of then you turn up, you show up bit by bit. You can't eat the whole loaf at once, but you can do it crumb by crumb.
It's interesting because I look at it and go, the winningest team in the world, and yet there are two things in there about ongoing humility, no dickheads and sweep the sheds, which, are often, certainly if you look at professional football, that seems to be the antithesis of professional football.
I mean, as you said, yes and no. I've worked in professional football, and yeah, there can be some attitude. Generally, when it comes to the training ground, there isn't.
Yeah.
It tends to be perceived that way and maybe directed outwards, and a flash car and flashing the cash at a club but entitlement is the enemy of high performance.
Yes.
Unearned glory, right? I know it all, right? Whereas you got to keep earning it, and one might make the argument, I'm going to get into trouble here, that traditionally getting an England jersey means you made it, right? Getting an All Black jersey means you just begun. There's the story of Richie McCaw who announced to his family he wanted to be an All Black, and his uncle said, "Surely you want to be more than that. Surely you want to be a great All Black." And that became Richie. He would run a GAB, and he'd ask himself, "What would a great All Black do?" Now that's a very different attitude than I've got the jersey and I've got the car and I've got the kudos that I would argue sometimes occurs within, let's say, a more English mindset. But the teams that really do well in any environment, one in which, it's team first, nothing is bigger than the jersey. And that's across the board. That doesn't matter what it is. And there are incarnations of that. I'd say that 2003 team, Martin Johnson really led in that way. It was about contribution to something bigger than yourself. Jim Collins in business, in Good to Great, talks about level 5 leadership. Lao Tzu talks about that idea of servant leadership. Greg Popovich, talks about getting people who get out of from the San Antonio Spurs who have gotten out of their own way, right? Ego's the enemy. Entitlement is the enemy. It's one of the oldest lessons handed down from, the idea of the Achilles heel. Achilles, he was immortal, except for that little weakness where his mother dipped him in the river. And of course, that's a story that's been handed down because it's a moral lesson. It's a moral lesson that as soon as our egos get involved, and as soon as we figure we're all in, it's all over. And that's where we make mistakes. That's where we make bad judgments. And that's where we also think that somehow victory is given to us, not earned. And so humility isn't being a good Cub Scout. It's not about being kind of, goody good. And it's definitely not being meek. The arrogance is weakness. Arrogance is weakness, right? Humility takes real moral courage, not to decide it's all about you. And as soon as you take that mindset, you have a beginner's mind.
Yeah.
A novice mindset. You're a decent human being to other human beings. You don't think that you're better than. It's not a coincidence that the British essayist, their ethos, talks about humility in a sense of humor. It's sort of the fourth tenet of their ethos, because, as soon as you get ahead of yourself, you kind of, you begin to lose, really. And, we've seen that in all sorts of, right now, Manchester City are going through a tough time. Haaland, went to Arteta, I can't remember the phrase, but it was about humility. And now, of course, the backlash is to who's humble now.
Yeah.
As soon as you get to that point where you think you're all in, it's all over, I think. And, we know that in life. You invest badly, you drive badly, you make crappy decisions. So humility becomes a bedrock, I think, for growth, for making good decisions, good judgment, and for better connections between human beings. And then within a group, that better connection means you're serving the interests of everybody else, a collective interest rather than your own. And if everybody's doing that, you have a very powerful group.
Fab. I think that's it's a great place to jump off and ask you some rapid fire questions then.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What drives you every day?
What drives me every day? Well, that's a good question. Without sounding like I'm not humble, the idea of excellence, I think, in terms of kind of doing it right, the best that I can, being the best version of myself that I can be, perhaps.
Okay. And what do you think your genius is?
Again, at the risk of humility. I think my sort of super strength is the ability to articulate ideas, and I'd probably call it a synthesis between sort of strategy and creativity. Probably is the ability to have an overarching idea of how it all fits together, but the ability to, I call it three things: to synthesize, simplify, and storytell. To bring it all together, bring it down to the essence, the sort of first principles, the nub of it, and then wrap it or tell it in a story that provides context and engagement and entertainment, maybe.
What unpopular opinion do you hold?
Well, unpopular opinion. These are good. You didn't warn me how good these questions were. What unpopular opinion? Probably many. I think there's a phrase that a coach I worked with uses. He says, "You get what you deserve."
Yeah.
You get what you deserve. That life's not fair. You don't always win, right? But you get what you deserve after, usually. What you put in tends to be what you get out. Not always straight away, and you don't always win, but you kind of get what you deserve. And so I think the unpopular thing, it becomes around, because it can be hurtful to think about this, about that absolute self-responsibility and accountability for, you can't complain. Well, the ball was slippery or whatever. Deal with the slippery ball. Yeah. And sometimes I think that's unpopular because that can be difficult to hear.
When my kids come to me and they are about to complain about something, I say, life's not fair. All rules are made up. Nobody's in charge. Is it any of those three things? Because if it is, I'm not interested.
Yeah.
And they just roll their eyes and walk off. What's the most significant risk you've taken?
Oh, I think there's a number of them. I think anytime you set off to write a book, it's a significant risk because you spend years getting there, and who knows whether anyone will read it or care. So I think that's a pretty significant risk in business terms. I think probably the most significant risk is choosing my life partner. I got it wrong the first time. I got it right the second time. Polly, my wife, of course, it's a massive, massive risk stepping into a relationship. We're in our 20-something year now, and who knows how that might have turned out. So I don't know. Hopefully I get brownie points at home.
We've got a card on our fridge that my wife bought for me, and it says, "Sometimes I look at you and wonder how you got so lucky."
Wow. I look at myself and wonder how I got so lucky. So it was a risk, I guess, that paid off.
How do you measure success?
I don't think you can. I think success is fleeting.
Okay.
And I think that, any measure is fleeting in a way. I think when do I feel successful? I think, I think the love of a family is probably about as good as it gets. Very good.
What's the most recent thing you've learned or recent skill you've acquired?
I should have done some homework on this. Where my mind goes on that is, I'm a writer and I'm writing and there's a phrase, write what you know. There's another phrase, write what you don't know. And so I think areas that are kind of lighting up for me at the moment in terms of learning are in terms of performance, in that performance space are around, some of the sort of the neuroscience of kind of the way we're wired. I had a really, really interesting conversation with a client who's very interested in neuroscience and was talking about the amygdala and which we always see as the sort of reptilian fear response, right? But in fact, within the amygdala, there are other aspects to it that there's really the opposite, is the counterbalance. And there's that idea that, and so monks, when they kind of meditate on compassionate kindness, develop an aspect of the amygdala, like it thickens, if you like, that's really about compassion and love.
Uh-huh.
Right at the base of our human experience, right in our reptilian response pattern, there's love and hate, or fear and love, or, expansion and retraction, or however it is. And that we can impact that with the choices that we make. And I think it's a Cherokee phrase, there are two wolves, one that's angry and the other that's friendly, within us, and which one will prevail? And of course the answer to that parable is the one we feed.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been engaging with that as a sort of, how do we, without sounding like an old hippie, how do we choose love? How do we choose to create a positive aspect as an antidote? And of course, that's the great civilizing force. And if you take that into performance aspects, you might think about the work, that the England cricket team has done around, it's called baseball, to Brendan McCullum, that idea of how do you bring that kind of reward-oriented attitude, the kind of go for the gap attitude, into life. And there's a lot of the sort of physiology around it. There's a behavioral activation system, which is reward-oriented. There's a behavioral inhibition system that's based on how much dopamine you have in your system. So how do you create the conditions within enabled to stay in that reward-oriented space, I think. So I've been really exploring and trying to learn about that and understand that, because I think that becomes about how do we show up in the world. And the world's you get what you deserve. The world's a mirror to what we bring. So I think that's probably the area that I'm digging around in.
Do you know, I was laughing because I when you were saying that was your unpopular opinion, I suppose I have an opinion that mirrors that, which is sometimes when other people's children, I feel that parents get the children they deserve often. And so when they're complaining about the behavior of their children or lack thereof,
I think that's absolutely right. We all complain, and it's relieving to have a bit of a bitch session about anything. It relieves tension, it relieves pressure, but it also relieves us of responsibility.
Yes.
And one of the most painful thing to sit with is the idea that, maybe I can change it. Maybe I should have changed it. Maybe it's on me. Maybe I screwed up. Maybe I'm a shitty parent. All of those things. Now, that's hard stuff to sit with, right? Really hard sometimes. Much easier to say, he was always a bad one, or whatever, right? And so that kind of trying to be absolutely accountable for your own stuff, I think becomes a life's work sometimes. Because, and in a way, Field Marshal Slim, the British Army leader, he said, leadership is just plain you. It's you. It's authenticity, it's accountability, it's all of those things. If we just think it's all going to happen, then we're somehow outsourcing the impact. It's on us. And, I'm not even popular with myself saying that, because it's hard. It's a hard truth.
It is. And then you take that into the team, and it goes back to that, seeking criticism. It's like, it's hard for me to say it to myself, but I want my colleagues to point this out to me so that I can sit with it.
Stab me in the belly.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, because, we talked about the reward and the inhibition. If there's too much criticism and too much incoming, we physiologically retreat, and that impacts performance. If we feel we're being scrutinized, surveilled, judged beforehand, if I walk up to give a speech, say, and somebody I saw your speech the other day. I didn't like this bit and this bit. Like, I'm going to walk up there and not perform. So you've also got to get that right, that balance right, I think, between kind of challenge and confidence. And, generalship, that idea of general, it comes from the original root of the word is judgment. How do we make the right judgment on the conditions that we create around us? One of my favorite quotes is from an educationist. He says, I've come to the frightening conclusion that I make the weather, that I create the climate. I create the conditions that kind of resonate beyond me. So who am I being as a leader in this environment, and what are the conditions that I'm creating? And it becomes, and then responsibility and accountability for the ripples that go outwards are on you. So rather than walking into a meeting and screaming and shouting, it's like, well, it's not. Another coach I've spoken to said, it's all right to fly the plane, but you got to land it. It doesn't matter what your message is. You got to land that message. Yeah. So you make the weather. What is that weather that you're creating? And so again, I guess it comes back to the stuff I'm playing with at the moment or engaging in at the moment in terms of learning.
Other than picking up a copy of Legacy or listening to Legacy, what other books on the topics we've discussed today, or anything else you've been listening to or reading recently?
Yeah, the best way to develop as a leader is not necessarily through leadership books. Often, Man's Search for Meaning, I always recommend. The Viktor Frankl book, because it's really about meaning and making meaning and what meaning means, if you like. For those who don't know the book, he was in the camps, Jewish, went to the camps, survived the camps, and he writes about how and who survived, and around purpose and meaning, and how that created the kind of the resilience and the resourcefulness that it certainly took him. And it's in two parts. There's one, his story, and then there's this sort of interpretation of it. It's very moving and very powerful. So, I would say that Thinking Fast and Slow, Daniel Kahneman, around the way our minds work and play tricks often. If we talk about culture, I think Dan Coyle's books, The Culture Code, I think are a pretty good place to start. Oh, and we talked about Jim Collins and Good to Great. I think it's got to be on everyone's reading list at some point. It's slightly dated now, but at the same time, it's got a lot to say, I think, about the way leaders interact with organization.
Yeah, indeed. James, absolute pleasure chatting to you today. Thank you very much indeed for coming on.
It's a real pleasure. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.